Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we are working with this lovely little Phalaenopsis orchid that needs a little bit of help because, as you can see, we are dealing with some sort of mold or fungal outbreak in the medium. And well, I have to say, I didn't actually deal with a lot of fungal problems along the years, but I did get quite a few comments on it. So this is a great opportunity to make a video on it, take you along during the process of actually getting rid of whatever is happening here, show you how I would safely go about it, but also try to imagine a few different scenarios you might find yourselves in, talk a bit about what are molds, do we actually need to do anything about it, and so on and so forth. So I hope you will enjoy today's subject. If you end up liking the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for weekly videos I post 3 times a week. So with that said, let's start by addressing molds. What are they, and do we actually need to do anything about them? So mold is actually a fungus that forms filaments rather than actual mushrooms that are called hyphae. That's why in many cases you will see mold looking rather fuzzy than like a typical mushroom. The mushroom itself is called a fruiting body, and not all fungi produce them. What I'm dealing with here is not your typical mold, that fuzzy or gray type of mold you usually get with orchids, but nonetheless, it is a fungus and we will go about it in the exact same manner. All of those tiny white specks that you see in the pot, they're actually tiny little mushrooms, so practically the fruiting body. And no, they're not eggs of some sort of insects. I do not know of any insect, rather than snails, that lays these types of eggs. And also, after I water my orchid, I get a really strong mushroom smell. So there is no doubt about it. This is a fungus. And if Joey says it's a fungus, then it's a fungus. And also, without proper in-depth and microscope investigation, we cannot really put a label on a mushroom or a fungus because there are just so many types of them that just by going on how it looks like, most of the times we will be wrong. And this is actually why we do need to intervene in case we have a mold or fungus outbreak, because we don't know what we're dealing with here. First of all, we don't know if it's harmful for our orchid. It might not be. But then again, what if it is harmful to us? You might know that having molds in your home is really not a good idea, and it can seriously affect your respiratory system. So there is absolutely no point in taking any risks with something you don't actually know what it is. But where do these fungi actually come from? Well, they can come from the air. Each environment can actually have fungal spores in the air, as well as algae spores and all sorts of other microbes in the air. What they need is the proper environment to flourish and multiply. And what they all love is moisture and lack of fresh air or ventilation, such as the orchid pot. But of course, they can also be brought by the orchids themselves. Spores can be found on the old medium and also on the roots. You might get rid of all of the original medium your orchid came with, but there will still be spores on the roots, on the orchid herself. So from there, if they receive the proper environment, they can start to take over. And I do believe this was the case with my orchid as well, because this is the first time that I'm having this type of mold. And with Phalaenopsis, I don't typically sterilize the root system because I don't really have bush snail issues with Phalaenopsis. And being that in more than 400 orchids, this is the first case that I have and it didn't actually spread, I do believe it was something this orchid arrived with rather than something that I have in the air. And as we can see, it did take over both the root system but also the medium. So one of the most important things to do whenever we are dealing with a fungal outbreak is to determine what the source of the outbreak is, because just treating symptoms will never actually get us rid of the problem. We need to get rid of the source of the problem. So here are some possible sources. The actual air in your room. Is it ventilated enough? Is it refreshed enough? Because if you have in your home other plants with soils, they might actually carry fungal spores that can pass over to your orchid. And the way to minimize this is just by refreshing the air in your room more often. This will also benefit you, not only your orchids. Then let's look at the medium. Is the medium old, broken down? Especially when we acquire new orchids, we might deal with very old media that need replacing. If you know that the medium is old, then definitely it is time to repot the orchid. And most of the times this will actually solve the issue because the source was the old medium. If you're not sure if your medium is old, simply water the orchid, wait a minute or two, and then sniff a little bit the medium. It's weird, but it actually works. If it smells bad, mushroomy, and just degraded and awful, then definitely you should get rid of that medium because it is old, broken down, acidic. It will affect the orchid. It can promote fungi as well. Then let's think about the ventilation through the pot. Sometimes the fact that we don't provide aeration holes through the pot can actually maintain way too much humidity and way too less ventilation through the pot, and that will give fungal spores a great medium to develop. Sometimes there isn't much we can do about the fungal spores in our environment, in the air, no matter how much we try to refresh it. So what we can do is address the environment. If they don't have the proper environment to develop, then they won't develop. So always make sure that you have as much ventilation in your orchid pot as possible. This will help the orchid as well, particularly if it's an epiphytic orchid, like most orchids we have, because the roots really love air as well. They will also be much safer from suffocation. Then let's think about the medium yet again. You might actually have just repotted your orchid, but maybe you used very bad quality medium, which has actually happened to me in the past. And oh boy, I lost 20 orchids or so due to bad medium that had all sorts of microbes, pathogens, and fungal spores in it. Typically, when you open a bag of medium, it should smell like a forest, if not like nothing at all. If you detect the smell of mushrooms, that is not a good sign. Brand new medium should not smell like mushrooms. Sphagnum moss smells like hay. Brand new bark smells like a pine forest. If it smells earthy or mushroomy, that medium is not what you need for your epiphytic orchid and for growing indoors. Another thing you should definitely think about is the amount of dead roots inside your medium. Did you remove all of the dead roots that you could possibly find when you repotted your orchid? If no, then maybe there are still some dead roots that are starting to break down, and some fungi really like to feast on dead organic material, which is a good thing. They're doing their job. But their job is not supposed to happen in your living room, but outside of your house. With breaking down, all sorts of byproducts will be released in the air, and those byproducts in a very contained and confined environment are not good for the orchid, and they're not good for you either. Also, consider that maybe your orchid suffered a shock when you repotted it and some of the roots did not adapt. Even if you removed all of the dead roots when you repotted, maybe some of them just died in the process. I'll link you to more videos about this phenomenon in the description and how you can actually avoid it. But if you suspect that you do have some dead roots in your pot, definitely it is a great idea to unpot the orchid and check out and see if you have any dead roots. Then let's go back to the repotting process. Did you make sure that you removed as much of the old medium as possible? If you left a few pieces attached on the roots, that's okay. But if you happen to leave about 50% of the old medium inside and then you just put brand new medium, well, that could be enough to preserve mold spores and to give them a really good life and a great source of food in the form of that old breaking down medium. So always make sure that when you repot orchids, you remove as much of the old medium as possible. You don't necessarily need to remove 100% of it. You can leave a few pieces if they're super attached to the roots and you don't have too many roots. But as much as humanly possible, do try to remove that old medium because in time it will break down and promote fungal outbreaks. And one last thing we're gonna address, are you watering your orchid correctly? As I was saying, fungi really like moisture. So maybe your fungal outbreak is just caused by an improper watering regime. Maybe you are watering your orchid way too frequently. For most orchids you can grow in your home, and definitely for Phalaenopsis, it is a great idea to let that medium dry out in between waterings. And when I say dry out, I mean let it dry out thoroughly. This will limit the outbreak of at least some molds. Even if molds are present and they try to develop, that drying out will just make sure that periodically they are all wiped out. I will remind you though that there are so many types of molds that even if you do something correct, which theoretically should help you out, it doesn't mean you will not have a different type of mold outbreak. Like in my case here, yes, I am making sure that the medium dries out, but still I have quite a bit of outbreak here because this is not necessarily mold, it is a mushroom. And if it's a mushroom that has a tolerance to dryness, well, hey presto, there we go. So it really depends on the case, but definitely all of these things that I just told you about will help you out. So knowing all of these preventative measures now, let's presume that we still have issues. So we haven't addressed the cause. Well, in my case, I am presuming that the cause is the actual orchid herself. It came with some fungal spores on its roots that got passed on to the new medium. So all I need to do is get rid of this medium, repot the orchid, and sterilize the root system. And in this way, I think I will take care of the source. A perfect and safe way of sterilizing orchid roots is with the use of hydrogen peroxide 3% that you can find at the pharmacy. Now, 3% is a concentration that I've worked with for the past 7 years or so, and I cannot really say I had issues. Higher than 3% though, I cannot really guarantee that it will not harm your orchid, so if you intend to use this, do make sure that the concentration is 3%. Now, one way I could go about this is by soaking this entire pot in the medium in hydrogen peroxide 3% solution, because this will take care of the fungal spores and the fungi as well. Well, there are a few reasons why I don't want to use that. First of all, I don't have a lot of this solution at my disposal because in the area of the world where I live, it's not being sold in these types of quantities. This is a gift from a friend, actually. Second, there are many air pockets in the medium, and we need to make sure that the hydrogen peroxide touches all of the medium and all of the roots. If we forget just one little pocket in which some fungal spores can hide, then we're gonna go through this all over again. So I don't want to take any risks, being that this is a tiny pot and I have a tiny orchid which is pretty recent in my collection, it's not established. I prefer to just on-pot everything, spray the entire root system, and offer it brand new medium. And before we go ahead with the repotting, I do want to mention that other solutions such as isopropyl alcohol or other types of alcohol or bleach solutions or things of the sorts, I personally don't like to use. Alcohol will definitely damage roots because it is a drying agent. With bleach, you need to be super careful that you don't overuse the bleach and damage the root system. So my preferred solution remains hydrogen peroxide because it is safe, it is mild. This stuff you put on your hands when you have a little wound and it's absolutely okay. And also, hydrogen peroxide has a very limited, let's say, spectrum. It works on fungi. That's what I'm using it for in this instance. It doesn't actually desiccate roots or anything of the sorts. So just like with any unpotting, I will go ahead and squeeze a little bit on this pot to make sure that the roots are not stuck to the sides of the pot. And you could actually do this directly on top of your trash bin. And oh boy, look at that. I have multiple types of molds in this pot. So you can see in this area that I have that typical fuzzy white mold as well. So what I have here is a multitude of different types of fungi, and right now the medium smells bad. So I want to get rid of it as fast as possible. I will try to remove it as much as possible from the root system. All of the little pieces I will try to remove. And now it's time to disinfect our orchid. I put hydrogen peroxide in the spray bottle and I will spray this orchid quite liberally, with emphasis on the root system and the bottom of the axis. But I will go a little bit up the orchid as well, just to make sure that I got rid of all of those spores. Since this is a big outbreak, I don't want to take any chances. At this point, we should start hearing some fizzing on the orchid, which I do. It means the hydrogen peroxide is working. So I'm gonna let this orchid fizz away for a few minutes. And afterwards, I'm gonna give it another spray, and I think we're gonna be done. Alright, so my orchid is disinfected. I also washed the pot, the decorative container, and the tag with bathroom detergent. I am confident that this took care of any fungal spores. So now it is time to repot. We're done. My orchid is repotted. I also gave it a good watering, and I'm hoping that from now on I will not have any more issues. So before we end the video, a few more questions that I will answer. After hydrogen peroxide, you do not need to rinse or wash or anything of the sorts, because this is actually water with an extra oxygen atom. So after the initial reaction, the oxygen will be released in the air, and all you will have on the orchid is water. However, though, it is important to make sure that you do dry the orchid very, very well, particularly in the crown and in between the leaves, at the joints of the leaves, because this water can lead to rotting if it doesn't evaporate in time, if it accumulates pathogens. You know the story. In a home, it's not a good idea to leave water standing in the crown, because this is not nature. We need to play by different rules. As you could see, we had a mold outbreak because there were no organisms to feed on the mold, which, by the way, there exist and we can have them. And I have a link down below in the description talking more about them. So other than that, hydrogen peroxide is not dangerous for the leaves, but the water standing in the crown is. The old medium got tossed in the trash, and I took the bag outside because the spores can actually spread in the air again, and I don't want them in my grow room. And if you ever have a mold outbreak, it is a very good idea to look at the orchids or plants around your orchid that is infected. I took a look and I didn't see any other orchids that had issues, so I'm confident that it was only an issue with this orchid. And there is one more thing I will touch base on. You will notice that with some orchids you will have some critters in the medium moving about. Well, try not to get rid of them, because most probably they are springtails and they actually feed on fungus. Some molds that are affecting orchids are completely eliminated by springtails and soil dwellers. So if you ever see them, try not to worry, because most probably they are not pests. So this was about it for today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and it will help you out in the future when you will have an issue with molds. Having mold issues is pretty common in this hobby, so don't worry about it if you reach there. I hope that now you know what to do about it. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. So that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!